Welcome to American History Notes, where I discuss things I've learned about American history, share them with you. They're just a survey, a superficial thing, and you certainly will find more details if you study these topics. And I'm a Bible-believing Christian, so you might not agree with my conclusions. You might even be offended by my conclusions, but at least you should learn about this stuff. So you have your own opinions based on your own research, your own study, rather than somebody else's opinion. All right, that's my big hope, that you'll study American history even if you don't like American history or don't like it, like your view of it. Okay, most of America's famous criminals were white. Outlaws from the Old West have become heroes today. Men like Jesse James, John Wesley Hardin, Billy the Kid, the Dalton Gang, and women like Belle Starr are heroes today. The stuff of legend, song, and movies. In the same vein, notorious killers from the Depression era, such as Machine Gun Kelly, Bonnie and Clyde, and John Dillinger, have also been deified in popular entertainment media. And these are all people that come from a European background, whatever that means. So that's our famous criminals in the past. Ironically, many of the men who fought to capture these murderers have been vilified in popular culture. J. Edgar Hoover, one of our history's most famous crime fighters, longtime head of the FBI, has been attacked for being a fascist and mocked as a cross-dressing and petty, vengeful criminal himself. J. Edgar Hoover was director of the FBI for 49 years until his death in 1972. He is accused of flagrant abuse of his authority and of persecuting people for their political beliefs. So the FBI has always been a political tool, no matter which side you look at it from. Some of the accusations may indeed be true. Some of them may be true. I don't know. Remember, there's always a strain in our society, a pull between the absolute rights of the individual and what is in the best interest of order in our society. Because of Hoover's long and controversial reign, FBI directors, as I understand it, are limited to 10 years. Hoover was fixated on subversives and defending America, and some say that 9/11 could not have happened if he had been in charge. If you study Director Hoover independently, be skeptical of reports. They either glorify him as a paragon of professionalism or as a dastardly Sheriff of Nottingham type. Both would be wrong. Law enforcement is a function of not only written rules, but of the temper of the culture and of the ruling authorities. Unless you're using robots for policing, you will never get away from the human factor. And even with robots, you'd be dealing with the biases of their programmers. The more lawless and immoral America becomes, the more overbearing and potentially tyrannical our police authorities will become in response. If you want a lighter hand than the authorities, we must demand a stricter oversight of their policies and procedures from our politicians and a more traditional sense of values and respect for law and order from our fellow citizens. I am firmly convinced from looking and studying the events of things like Ferguson, Missouri, Baltimore, with Michael Brown and Freddie Gray and all those incidents that have happened, that the problem is not just a rogue police officer, it's the policies of the police department. Michael Brown's death should not have happened if you didn't have policemen out on their own, just wanted it one-on-one, trying to police people, police the city. And the same way in Ferguson, if 80% of the people in the city are black, but only 20% of the police are, you're going to have a problem. I mean, if in my town, all the police were Arabs, I think there'd be a little bit of a trust problem, right? So anyway, but on top of that, we have to remember in our society, Psalm 12:8 says, the wicked walk on every side when the vilest men are exalted. Such is the case with the state of our nation today. It is a warning we as Christians must heed very carefully. As a conservative, I am willing to admit there is such a thing as institutional racism. I'm just not agreeing with the authorities on the left as to how that shows itself and what the solutions are. So now it would have been easy to make this video a lecture about libertarian values or the erosion of our rights and freedoms and the persecution of Christians and the loss of Christian values. But that isn't my purpose. The police do not create the laws. Their job is to enforce them. Our freedoms, particularly our freedom to worship and serve God in the way that we believe, and the way he is pleased with, is threatened by politicians we have elected before it is threatened by the police who enforce the laws they put forward. When reading about crime, you will come across two seemingly different types of crime, both in the type of the perpetrator and in the type of the enforcement: white-collar crimes and street crimes. These are the crimes of the street and the crimes of the suite. Street crimes would include burglary, robbery, assault, murder, rape, while sweet crimes would be like securities fraud, embezzlement, and various other kinds of fraud, while drug offenses could be common to both, but easier to enforce and more obvious on the street level. Some interesting facts from the Federal Bureau of Prisons at the turn of the century show that the average age of a federal inmate was 38 years old, and that nearly 30% of all federal inmates weren't even American citizens. More than half were in for drug offenses. Taking the state of Maryland, you would find the official statistics to be over 26,000 persons were locked up in 2000 and over 66,000 more on probation or parole. Probation is a sentence either given in lieu of instead of confinement or along with a confinement sentence, and the sentenced person is under the supervision of a probation officer. Parole is the time left on one's sentence that he or she technically is free from confinement, but under the supervision of a parole officer. And I hope you'll look up the most current statistics. I did this deliberately. I want you to be interested. If you're interested, to go, okay, what happened? What about 2022? How different is it? So putting people in prison today also has some private companies doing the state's job of managing incarcerated convicts, usually called inmates anymore. Some of the more famous prisons are Alcatraz Island, also known as the Rock, in San Francisco Bay, which was a prison from 1934 to 1963. The infamous Angola prison in Louisiana, which went from the country's worst prison to one of its best in the years between 1952 and 1972. Attica prison in New York, which was the site of one of the worst prison riot in U.S. history, and Sing Sing prison in Ossining, New York. Auburn prison in Auburn, New York, was one of the nation's first, excuse me, constructed in 1816, built with the authority of legislation passed in 1796. San Quentin and Folsom Prison are two of the oldest in the West. Two important things to note about our system of justice is that according to our legal philosophy, you are innocent until you're proven guilty. Another thing is that most cases are ended in what is called a plea bargain, where the state offers a lighter sentence than one might be facing after a trial in return for a guilty plea. And I assure you that there are many people who plead guilty who are not guilty, but know they have very little chance of being able to afford a decent trial and justice. And so guilty pleas don't necessarily mean the person is guilty. Usually, the poorer the person is, the more likely they are to enter a guilty plea just to get this over with and get a lighter sentence. Don't fire up the jury, you know? So another aspect of our system is that the accused does not have to give any information to the police. It's not up to the citizen to incriminate himself or to give any statement to the police other than his name. Also, unlike in colonial America, the accused has a right to legal counsel, free if he's unable to afford to pay a paid lawyer. These free lawyers, paid by the taxpayer, are often called public defenders, and many times just don't offer very good defense, but sometimes they do. If they do, those public defenders go on to be criminal defense attorneys on their own. The Miranda warning is a warning that police give to an accused person that says that anything he says can and will be used against him in a court of law, and that he has the right to remain silent. It is named after the 1966 Supreme Court decision in the case of Miranda versus Arizona, upholding an individual's right to remain silent and not to incriminate himself based on the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. One does not have to incriminate oneself from the witness stand and complete the Fifth by exercising his rights under that amendment, as the famous movie line, I refuse to answer on the grounds that it may tend to incriminate me. There's also the spousal privilege rule that says the defendant's wife can't be forced to testify against him, although the defendant can't prevent his wife from testifying against him. The rule does not prevent testimony about conversations or actions before marriage or after divorce. The right to counsel in felony trials was confirmed by the Supreme Court in the 1963 Gideon versus Wainwright decision. The United States, however, even further than that decision, goes even further than that now. And if anyone's liberty is in danger in any proceeding, either civil or criminal or administrative, he or she is entitled to a free defense if they are unable to pay for a lawyer. However, under our system, you also have the right to defend yourself and act as your own lawyer if you are nuts enough to think you can do that. It has been said that he who acts as his own criminal defense lawyer has a fool for a client. I've only barely touched the topic of crime and punishment in American history, and I've avoided salacious topics like serial killers and mass murderers and mass shooters, as well as complicated topics like the controversy surrounding the death penalty. And I encourage you to look at these things in independent study. So this is just survey. I'm going to name some things I think you should know about. I think you should be able to name 4 offices in colonial America still existing today that helped early American communities deal with crime. I think you should name a capital offense for which you could receive capital punishment. I think you should be able to name what city produced the first organized police force in America. and what federal police agency was the first uniform police agency in the country. I think you should know which federal investigative agency began in 1908 and was headed for nearly 50 years by J. Edgar Hoover. I think you should be able to name two famous American criminals. Give us what was the name of the island where the famous federal prison known as the Rock stood in San Francisco Bay, and also name two Supreme Court decisions. One guaranteed that you had the right to be apprised of your right to remain silent, and the other which affirmed your right to counsel in a felony case. Now, next we're gonna study, get a review of science and technology, things I didn't cover before throughout the scope of American history. We'll get that over with. We have many other special topics to discuss. I have so much content that I want to share with you, things that I've learned. And like I say, I don't care if you don't agree with me. That's fine. You're not my enemy. If that means that you'll dig and study American history and come to your own conclusions, then I'm happy. That's what I want to see happen. So whatever your belief system, whatever your point of view, left, right, center, libertarian, Republican, Democrat, communist, as long as you're studying American history and you have your own conclusions, I really feel good about that. Thank you.